Lebanon says any Israeli presence on its soil is now an occupation. The deadline for a complete Israeli withdrawal has come and gone. So how long will Israeli troops remain in southern Lebanon? And can Lebanon assert its sovereignty? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. The Lebanese army is clearing unexploded munitions from areas in the south while Israeli forces withdraw. Some families displaced by 14 months of cross-border fighting between Israel and Hezbollah are making their way back to their homes, many in ruins. The new Prime Minister says he wants Israeli troops out of every last inch of Lebanon. But Israel's Defence Minister says some soldiers will remain in 5 positions. He says Israel will enforce the ceasefire, but will also act against any Hezbollah threat. On Monday, an Israeli drone strike in the port city of Sidon killed a Hamas official. It's one of many Israeli attacks since the ceasefire took effect on November the 27th. So how will Lebanon's new leadership grapple with Israel's partial withdrawal? And is Hezbollah likely to resume fighting if an Israeli presence continues? We'll examine these questions with our guests in a moment, but first this report from Alexandra Byers.
Tens of thousands of families in southern Lebanon have spent more than a year waiting for this moment. The chance to finally return home, even though for many, there's nothing left.
These are our homes. We built them with hard work and toil, without theft, injustice, or anything unlawful. This is our land, and we will never give it up.
14 months of hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah drove at least 100,000 people from towns and villages along the border. On Tuesday, Israeli troops finally withdrew, and the Lebanese army began clearing the bombs and the bodies.
The army did not allow us to enter until the Israelis withdrew, but they had destroyed everything, leaving nothing behind. No infrastructure, no electricity, no water, no roads. Any building that was standing, they leveled, and they burned what remained.
As part of a November ceasefire agreement, the Israeli army was meant to fully withdraw from Lebanon in late January. It did from some areas, but stayed along the border, and the deadline was extended. Also part of the ceasefire, Lebanon's army agreed to keep Hezbollah fighters away from Israeli territory. Israel says that still hasn't happened, and while it's pulled back from populated areas, it's announced some troops will remain in 5 hilltop positions in the south. The army says it's for security reasons, as the locations provide strategic vantage points.
Israel does not trust entirely the new political leadership that has come to power in Lebanon and wants to have the last word in the implementation of the terms of the ceasefire.
This doesn't help Lebanon's new government, which is trying to extend the state's authority. The new leadership wants Israeli troops gone from Lebanon and plans to seek help from the UN Security Council.
Urge it to take the necessary measures to address the Israeli violations and compel Israel to immediately withdraw to the international borders in compliance with the UN resolution. Secondly, to constitute any Israeli presence in any inch of Lebanese territory as an occupation.
The government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is promising to forcefully act against Hezbollah if the Lebanese army fails to do so. Israel has launched multiple attacks in recent days. But it's not just in Lebanon. Netanyahu says Israel is at war on 7 fronts, wreaking devastation in Gaza and the occupied West Bank, but also fighting groups in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, as well as Iran. And it continues to signal that ceasefire or not, it has no real intention of backing down on any of those fronts. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Hello again. Standing by are our guests Alon Pinkas in Tel Aviv and Rami Khouri in Boston. They'll join us a little later in the show. But first of all, let's bring in Ali Rizk, a political analyst and security affairs analyst in Beirut. Ali is unable to join the panel because it's illegal for Lebanese citizens to interact with Israelis in the media. Welcome to the programme. So, Ali, Lebanon's government says it's going to ask the UN Security Council to force an immediate withdrawal, Israeli withdrawal. But apart from that, there's really nothing the Lebanese government or Hezbollah can do, is there?
Well, I think right now, no, there is nothing that the government or Hezbollah can do. I think that it's not in the interest of Hezbollah to start a new round of warfare. The latest round of warfare did deal some very heavy blows to the movement, despite the fact that it wasn't defeated completely by Israel. But I think that in the medium term, in the longer term, if the Israelis do insist on staying in these positions, I think you're going to see some form of resistance. It might not necessarily be Hezbollah as an organization. It might be some of its supporters, the rightful owners, the inhabitants of the south, I think, who will not tolerate an ongoing Israeli occupation. So I believe that in the end, you are going to see some kind of action being taken against this Israeli presence, which at the end of the day is indeed occupation and the violation of the ceasefire.
So Ali is saying that Israel can sort of get away with it for now, but it could backfire in the long term.
I believe so, yes. Now, even for now, it's not clear. Sheikh Naim Qasim, the Hezbollah Secretary General, in his last speech, he addressed this issue and said it's not in our interest to say how we are going to react should the Israelis remain. Now, that leaves it open. It's an open-ended question. Will Hezbollah react immediately? Will it wait a little? In my own judgment, as I said, because it took such a heavy toll in the last round of fighting, I think that it'll find it more in its interests to wait, maybe to allow another form of resistance to take place, not necessarily Hezbollah per se, but some other groups, possible some supporters. But it is going, I'm quite sure that this is going to backfire against the Israelis. The Israelis do have a bitter experience in South Lebanon and in Lebanon as a whole. 1982, the year 2000, again and again, the Israelis did not have a very easy time when it comes to occupying Lebanese territories.
And Ali, Lebanon's new Prime Minister, Joseph Aoun, he says he's pledged to bring all arms, all weapons under the state's control. Is this new Lebanese government newly empowered, newly emboldened because Hezbollah is weakened?
I'm not sure that Joseph Aoun's statements can be taken within that framework. You have to remember that Benjamin Netanyahu, during his press conference with Marco Rubio, he said he called for the complete disarmament of Hezbollah. Now, that's not included, by the way, in the ceasefire agreement. So I think that Joseph Aoun, when he said that Hezbollah's weapons will be addressed via an internal Lebanese dialogue, I think this was partially, at least, a response to Netanyahu, saying that any issue related to the weapons of Hezbollah will be dealt with internally. And I think he was also saying very clearly that we are not in the process of going to some kind of infighting whereby the state enters into a confrontation with Hezbollah with the aim of disarming the movement. So I think it didn't really stem from the Lebanese president's perception of Hezbollah being in a weak state, but I think that statement can be placed within the framework of calming the tensions in this region or in Lebanon, and also responding to those, whether they be within the country or to Netanyahu, by saying that don't pin your hopes on the Lebanese state tackling Hezbollah on anyone's behalf, entering a confrontation, I mean.
OK, and just very quickly, Ali, obviously there are many Lebanese who prevented still from going back to their homes in the south. Do we know how many are still affected and how that affects Hezbollah's calculation?
Look, I'm not sure how many have been affected. Obviously, there's widespread destruction in South Lebanon. Masses have flocked to South Lebanon to return to their homes. There has been immense damage. Now, regarding the question, how has this affected Hezbollah's status or Hezbollah's popularity? I don't think it has been affected at all. If anything, I think that Hezbollah's popularity has increased. And quickly, I want to emphasize this point, which I always like to make. The assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, I think that's actually increased Hezbollah's popularity due to how Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was very supported by the people. So when he was assassinated, I think those who weren't members of Hezbollah but supporters are now going to become members and going to even be attached to the movement.
All right, Ali, Rizk, thanks very much. And now let's bring in our other guests. In Tel Aviv, we have Alon Pinkas, a former Israeli ambassador and consul general in New York. And in Boston is Rami Khouri, a distinguished public policy fellow at the American University of Beirut, who spent 30 years living in Lebanon. Welcome to you both. Alon, I'll begin with you if I can. So what is Israel's calculation here?
It's mostly tactical, Bernard. There's nothing strategic. There's no ulterior motive. I don't think Israel has, currently at least, any interest in staying in South Lebanon permanently, establishing any kind of permanent military position. Don't forget, Israel is deployed in Gaza. Israel is deployed inside Syria beyond the 1974 armistice lines. The Israeli military is also policing most of the West Bank. So there's absolutely no military justification, or for that matter, the resources necessary to stay in southern Lebanon. What was said previously, that according to the November agreement, the Lebanese army needs to assert authority and prevent Hezbollah from moving down south, that hasn't been completed. So I think Israel is staying on those 5 hilltops as a precaution, not as something with any longevity to it.
Do you see the same sort of thing, Rami, a sort of a tactical, temporary move by the Israelis?
Partly, but not fully. I disagree with Mr. Pinkas because I think there is I agree that Israel may not want to permanently occupy South Lebanon, but Israel does want to make sure that its priorities, its own security perceptions are what set the rules for the behavior of people in Lebanon, and Syria, and Iraq, and in Yemen, and in Jordan, and everywhere else. So the Israeli doctrine has been to fight wars inside Arab countries, not inside Israel, and to make sure that Israel's security, as Israel defines it in an exaggerated way, is always a priority for Israel and the United States and the Arab countries. So this is a long-standing situation between Lebanon and Israel. Before Hezbollah, there was the PLO. There was nationalist forces, leftist forces in Lebanon who fought against the Israelis going way back into the 50s and 60s. So this is a long-standing situation. Any Israeli move to assert its primacy in southern Lebanon is going to face some sort of resistance. Hezbollah was the most dramatic. It drove the Israelis out. And now there's a new situation that will evolve, and it's not clear how it will happen. The bottom line is that Lebanon and Israel will always have these kind of tensions, which means internal tensions in Lebanon between the government and Hezbollah and other forces, until there is a permanent, just resolution of the Israel-Palestine or the Zionism-Arabism conflict.
All right. So, Alon, could Israel risk outstaying its welcome, for want of a better expression, in southern Lebanon? You know, Hezbollah could end up saying, well, look, this diplomatic process isn't working. We can try other means.
Yeah, in the longer run, when I say longer run, I don't mean decades. I mean 6, 8 months from now, that could certainly become Hezbollah's logic. They need to regroup militarily. They have been devastated in the last year militarily and in terms of their political leadership, but they haven't been resoundingly defeated either. So it may take them time. They also lost the land, the ground conduit in Syria through which weapons from Iran were transferred. So Hezbollah is reorganizing militarily, also politically, but let's stick with the military. And yes, you're right. At some point, if Israel maintains its presence in South Lebanon, as Rami Khouri indicated, it might very well do. then Hezbollah may resort to other means. But again, Hezbollah's main power over Israel in the last decade, at least, was their perceived missile threats, their arsenal of long-range missile capabilities. That does not necessitate or justify Israeli military presence in South Lebanon, because an Israeli battalion deployed on 5 hilltops is not going to prevent missiles from flying into Israel. So it remains to be seen if the Lebanese government indeed is stable enough to then force some kind of renegotiation or reopen the negotiations in order to put an end to the disagreements or contentions over the international border demarcations. Until then, I agree with Rami Khouri, until then you will see this back and forth of Israel going in, Israel going out, Israel maintaining a short period presence, then pulling back, then going in again, so on and so forth.
I mean, Rami, obviously Hezbollah is significantly weakened, but Israel a long way from destroying Hezbollah as an organisation. It estimates it's still got 30% of its weapons, never mind tens of thousands of fighters. So what is his other strategy in terms of containing Hezbollah, if it can, to try and divide it, to stop it rebuilding communities in southern Lebanon, stopping the financing of reconstruction there?
Well, we've seen from the last 30, 40 years, Israel's strategy. It uses multiple tools, direct military attacks, harassment with drones and overflights, an occasional attack, like they killed a Hamas leader in Sidon 2 days ago, and they've killed some Lebanese, about 25 Lebanese, I think, were killed, who tried to go back to their villages in the last couple of weeks. It uses different forms. It relies heavily on American pressure. Israel, in Arab eyes, is the main instrument of the American sort of imperial colonial desires in the region, not physically to control the region like Britain did, but to set the terms of how people behave in the region. And Israel is very much reliant on U.S. Work. And the problem here is that the United States has had 2 examples now where it has been both a mediator and supposed to be the guarantor, or one of the guarantors of the ceasefires, with Hamas and with Lebanon. And in both cases has not been an impartial guarantor or mediator or monitor. It has clearly leaned to the Israeli side, which it has since the 1960s. This is nothing new. What's new is the willingness of people across the Arab region, including Lebanon and Palestine and elsewhere, to push back, to fight back. Nowhere near the military might that the U.S. and Israel have, but using other means to do so. And I think what we're going to see is that Hezbollah is going to focus much more internally now inside Lebanon on recalibrating its political position, its leverage inside Lebanon. It still has a lot of support, alliances with other people, and to reestablish itself politically in Lebanon without getting into a direct fight with Israel, because the destruction that has been caused by the various wars is too much for the country to bear.
OK, we'll come back in a moment to the US diplomatic role. But Alon, Israel's clearly emboldened by its victories over Hezbollah and elsewhere in the region. But does it believe it can secure all its objectives militarily? Does it still believe that, or does it accept that there's going to have to be some sort of diplomatic solution further down the line?
Well, you just asked the most important question, because there is an inherent structural deficiency in Israel's strategy, and that is that it doesn't have a strategy. It has military objectives, some of which are attainable, some of which may not be, but they are not derived from political means, neither in Gaza, nor in Lebanon, nor vis-a-vis Iran, for that matter. And when you don't have political aims or objectives, and when your military targets are not aligned with political targets, then you end up with Pyrrhic victories. Degrading Hezbollah militarily has done a lot for the Israeli psyche post October 7, 2023, as did a certain or a limited degree of degrading Iran's aerial defenses. But that is not going to produce anything of value in the long run unless there is a diplomatic objective, or at least diplomatic good faith and goodwill, none of which exists at this point. So, yes, going back to the beginning of your remark or question, Bernard, yes, Israel feels emboldened, but toward what end remains to be seen, because I certainly don't see one.
And that's it then, isn't it, Rami? I see you nodding a little there. Where does Israel go? Where is Israel going?
Well, I don't think Israel knows. This is their dilemma. You know, there's two things that have been pretty clear since 1920 or so, the last century of this conflict. Israel has never defined the political or military or ideological or physical borders of Zionism. What is Zionism? They say it's the state of the Jewish people, and Zionism is their strategy to reestablish what they claim is their ancestral state. But they've never defined the borders. That's why Israel keeps expanding, attacking neighboring countries, occupying land, creating settlements, pushing out people in the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem, now southern Syria. So that's one of the problems Israel has. It has to define how it can imagine living peacefully with the surrounding Arab countries and Palestine and 57 Islamic majority countries that have all offered to coexist with it. But it has to re-establish itself as a state within its 67 borders, with some obvious adjustments to account for some of the huge border settlements and exchanges of land and all that, which the Arabs have all agreed upon. So until we have a clear idea of how Israel can coexist, this situation will go on. The second thing behind that, quickly, is that Israel has never really used a consistent strategy other than killing and military force and threats and sanctions and punitive damage and destroying willfully people's homes and schools and hospitals that have no strategic value, but just making the point that it's the boss. What Israel wants is what happens in the region, and this generates only more resistance. If you look at the resistance to Israel in the last 10 years in the region, compared to, say, the 1960s, which I remember as a college student back then, there's massively bigger, widespread, deeper, and more effective resistance against Israel all across the region and across the world as well. And this is a problem for Israel.
All right. So, Alon, this Rami touched on it earlier on. This all happens as Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, makes his first visit to the region, and the Americans trying to keep two ceasefires going, one in Gaza and this one in Lebanon. How much of a challenge or how much of a test is this for US Trump-administered diplomacy?
Well, I haven't seen any diplomacy yet, but let me, Bernard, try and answer the last portion of what Rami Khouri said and tie it to your question. Right. A lot of what Israel has been doing that Rami Khouri described is born out of insecurity. Insecurity for decades, since 1948. Now, to make a long story short, since the late 60s into the mid 70s, following the Yom Kippur War of 1973, Israel sort of regained a lot of security in the sense that it had an American diplomatic umbrella and annual military aid. That led to an American diplomacy in the region that made Israel into a client state. That existed in the context of the Cold War, when there was a Soviet Union whose clients were, until 73 at least, Egypt and Syria. Well, since 1992, there's no Soviet Union. And so the U.S. is gradually retreating from the region for a variety of reasons: to end forever wars, because it achieved energy independence, because China is the great challenge of the next decades, and so on.
All right.
So I don't see American diplomacy here. What I see is an American attempt, sometimes cumbersome, sometimes frenzied, to get this off the table and off the agenda. They are not interested in Lebanon. They are not interested in Gaza, whether it's Trump's Riviera or just a ceasefire. They just want this off their table, off their radar, off their agenda. And I think this is what you're seeing now. Not some kind of a well-thought, coherent diplomacy, But let's get rid of this topic altogether.
All right, Rami, how do you see this test for Marco Rubio? You suggesting earlier on that the US really has already has its side, of course.
The United States, historically, meaning, say, the last 30, 40 years, has pretty much allowed Israel to set the terms for how the United States engages with the Arab-Israeli conflict. But the United States has tried to maintain control of how the United States deals with Iran. The Israelis have a super exaggerated perception of the threat from Iran. And before Iran, it was Iraq. Before Iraq, it was the PLO. And so historically, the Israelis always needed a huge threat in the region to which they could direct their own military power as well as American and Western support. Today, Iran is made to be that threat. The United States, the Saudis, others don't quite see Iran in the same totally threatening way that Israel does. And therefore, there are complications in how the U.S. and Israel align their policies. But the U.S. has, by its actions, not by its words, because its words are totally, like all superpowers, insincere, but its actions have given Israel virtually everything it wants, including annexing the Golan Heights, East Jerusalem, whatever you want. That probably will continue for a while, but that's reaching a limit to what it can achieve, and there has to be a focus at some point soon on a serious permanent resolution peacefully achieved through diplomatic talks that give both sides equal rights.
OK, very quickly, Alon, because time is right against us. Has Israel always exaggerated the threat from Iran? You can see in the last conflict, Israel was clearly able to suppress Hezbollah. So is there a threat as serious as Israel makes it out to be?
Well, it's a mixed answer, Bernard. On the one hand, the combination of a messianic radical regime as the Ayatollah, the Mullah regime in Iran is, with a weapon of mass destruction of a nuclear type, that's a lethal combination that Israel feels it cannot live with. On the other hand, turning this into the be-all and end-all of Israeli policy is something that Mr. Netanyahu perfected to an art. This is what he is. He has developed a narcissistic view of himself as a savior, not just of the Jewish people, but the entire Western civilization against Islamofascism. And every time there is a minor car accident in Stockholm, he will jump up and blame Iran for it, or some train delay in Vietnam. So, yeah, it's been exaggerated, but that doesn't mean it's not a real threat.
All right. OK, I have to let Alon have the last word there because time is against us. But thanks to Alon Pinkas and to Rami Khouri and to earlier Ali Rizk. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Bernard Smith, and the whole team here, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.